Mr. Perot, we have an awful lot to thank you for at the Naval Academy, and really as a great American, but we're grateful for your time today. We want to just talk about some of the stories that, I think embody the spirit that you've lived for your whole life. And we've just toured part of the museum here that is yours, and we saw your dad's first car, and the story that goes with that is very touching, how your father, long after these two gentlemen had retired in Texarkana from working for your dad, he would still go out and pay them. Would you say something about that? Because I think his service and sense of obligation to people is something that you've embodied in your life.
He certainly was a role model, and this was at a time when people who were African Americans sometimes were treated rudely and what have you, and he treated all people as equal, and he would take me to their churches on Sunday, and I can go on and on and on and on, and he would take them to the Bowie County Fair once a year. And then he grew up in a little town, New Boston, where the Bowie County family was living. He would give them his card, his business card, said, if anyone's rude to you, show them this card. And but he couldn't have been nicer, and he would take me to their church periodically, and he treated all people as equal, and that was a wonderful role model for a boy to grow up with. And he was so kind and so generous, and my mother was just an angel, because during the Depression, the railroad tracks were 6 miles, six blocks away from my house, and the people who had come all the way in from California would get off the train before they got downtown, or they would have arrested them because they were riding illegally as hobos. And they would come up a gravel street to our house, knock on the door for food, and my mother would always give them food. And one day, one of the men says, do you have a lot of people come up here looking for help? He said, yes, we do. He said, did you ever wonder why? And she says, no, I haven't. He said, well, come out here and I'll show you. There was a mark on the curb. It says, lady, you're a mark. And after he left, I says, Mother, do you want me to wash that off? She looked me right in the eye and says, no, son, these are people just like us. They're down on their luck. We need to help them. And my parents just were role models for that at all times. And it was a great way for a boy to grow up.
I suspect that if they were here today, Mr. Perot, they would admire everything you've done, but they'd admire even more the way you've done it.
Well, that's very kind, and that means a lot to me. But I sure miss them. They were, but as you see, I've got them right here with me, all the time, and so they're always right up in front of my mind. I'll never forget all the great things they did for me. My dad would pick me up after school. And he was a cotton broker, so when cotton was being sold in the fall, that was a busy time. He'd still pick me up after school, and we'd ride horses together till sunset. And not many boys get to spend that kind of time with their dad. And I can go on and on and on about the things that we did, but he was certainly my best friend, and I was so lucky to have him. And my mother was just an angel. She was just too good to be true, and I've always said I was born rich because of the two of them.
Well, that's a good thing to understand at an early age, Mr. Perot. Byron was going to ask you about your trip to the Naval Academy. Byron, would you do that?
Sure. First of all, Mr. Perot, it's an honor to be here with you.
Thank
you for your support of Navy, the Naval Academy in our country. And we're talking to all of our alumni here, and on behalf of the 55,000 plus alumni, we're really proud to be here with you.
Well, I'm looking forward to the big reunion. I'll be there.
You've got a big one coming up,
yes,
sir. Absolutely. As a young boy, we read your story, and you've mentioned over time that you're a man of principle. Principle over expediency has meant much of what comes out when we talk about you. And I'd like you to share your story as a young boy with alumni before we go to the academy around two stories you've told. One is when you were a paper boy serving the poor communities around Texarkana, and how that came about. It's an issue of principle. And the other was you were a Rhodes Scholar, R-O-A-D scholar.
Yeah, Rhodes Scholar. Right.
And it shows risk and the types of things that you did back in the day as a young boy to learn judgment. Can you share with our alumni a couple of those stories and how those things have affected you over time?
I started work when I was 5 years old. I've been working ever since. I'm now up in my 80s and still working.
Yes, sir.
So I guess I wouldn't know what to do if I wasn't going to work. But my first job I was selling Christmas cards and garden seeds. Now those were, just certain times in the year job. But I was at 5 years old. I was going out door to door, knocking on the doors and selling those. But I got paid nothing till I sold them. Then, when I was about 7 years old, I decided I'd like to sell, have a paper route. I found a paper route that was available over on the Arkansas side of Texarkana, and it was an interesting route. It was 2 blocks, all the way across Arkansas, the part of Arkansas. And I would ride there early every morning. I'd have to go down and pick my newspapers up from the newspaper company on my bicycle. Then I had to fold them. Then I had to go from door to door and deliver them. But then the most exciting job was on Saturday, you knocked on the doors, and if you're lucky, you got paid for the week you just delivered. And again, a lot of people worked on Saturday, so I had to work around that. But to make a long story short, this was a middle class. Everybody paid me. It was just a nice, clean, good job as a starter. And the interesting thing is, everybody said, well, at that young age, and here you're out before sunset rise in a bicycle, did anybody ever try to bother you? No. Then I had been very successful in my paper routes. The newspaper came to me and offered me the opportunity to deliver papers to the poorest sections in Texarkana on a horse, because it was gravel road. And I would get up at about 4 in the morning. I'd go over to, I'll ride over at a filling station where they'd leave the papers. I'd sit there and fold the papers and have these big bags and put them on the horse, and I'd ride back down into 2 areas, Newtown and Avondale in Texarkana, and deliver the papers. And everybody said, well, these people, if they're lucky, like the women make $5 a week, the men make $12 or $13 a week. And he said, you'll be really lucky if they pay you. I had the best payments I ever had on any paper route. Now, they were never there because they had to work. But with each one of them, they had a place where we hid the quarter. Now, I delivered the paper for 7 days for 25 cents. The paper got 17.5 cents. Normally, I got 7.5 cents, but they wanted me to take this route. And since I had to feed my horse and all that, they reversed it. I got 17.5 cents. They got 7.5 cents. And I got tremendous payments. And it's just not a problem. Then, in the middle of all of this, you'd say, well, surely during that tough time, somebody would, try to hold you up or something when you collect. Never had a problem, just safe as I could be. And, but then my dad had to go to Shreveport, which is about 80 miles from Texarkana, to have an operation. And I went on all the people's doors and explained that to them, and I said, now I don't have anybody else that can deliver this paper to you, but I hope you will take these papers when I come back. And again and again and again said, you save the papers until you come back and then deliver all of them, because if your dad's having an operation, you need the money. Now, can you believe that? Does that not tell you a lot about the people I grew up with? So then I did that. Then the newspaper wanted me to collect classified ads that people wouldn't pay. And I rode all over Texarkana on my bicycle collecting classified ads and had good luck there. And I got a piece of what I collected. So that turned out well. They didn't think they'd pay me, but they were nice people. They paid me, most of them did. And just one thing after another. And I dreamed of, I had this boyhood friend named Josh Morris that lived 2 blocks from me in Texarkana. His family had a very successful insurance company. So they were doing really well during bad times. Josh his father funded the Boy Scout Troop 18. Josh was in that troop. I went into that troop behind Josh, and that was a wonderful experience, and I learned another lesson in my life. I learned that I could be an Eagle Scout in 13 months. Wow. And I set that as a goal. Now, that's the good news. The bad news is my birthday was in June 27th, so I worked my way around, and by June of the next year, 1 month ahead, I had everything all done, but they didn't have any courts of honor till October. So I didn't get it in 13 months, but I got it done, and that was a great experience. But the Morris family couldn't have been nicer. Josh was so talented, he went to MIT, but he wanted to go to the Naval Academy. And he went to the Naval Academy while I was still in high school, and that's when I knew I wanted to go to the Naval Academy. But we didn't have any political contacts. So we talked to all the senators and congressmen and what have you, and one of them was W. Lee O'Daniel, known as Pappy O'Daniel, who was in the food business before he was the senator. And one of the famous things they always read about him was, "Please pass the biscuits, Pappy." Well, a long story short, I got in high school. I made my first effort. Didn't get in. I went to junior college in Texarkana. I had 2 good years there, and but in the second year, when I thought, well, I probably will never get in, I suddenly, it's right over there. I've got a Western Union from W. Lee O'Daniel, appointment to the Naval Academy, and I didn't ask any questions. I was ready to go, and but it was all the way from Texarkana to Annapolis, and I had never been on an airplane. And so for the first time in my life, I got to ride third class, or the cheapest thing we could get on. I don't know what it was then, but it was, and I got to ride up to Washington, but we landed 5 times between Texarkana and Washington. Can you believe that? That was still a fast trip. And then, see, I had hitchhiked all over the place. So I just hitchhiked down to the Naval Academy. And they were a little shocked when I came in that way, but that's the way I came in. And I got all the way through the physical, except I had a broken nose from breaking horses. And the doctor that was working on it said, "Son, go home, have your nose operated on, we'll let you in." And I said, "Well, I wish I could, but I can't afford the trip home and I can't afford the operation." And he said, "Oh, come on in, I'll fix it while you're here." He never touched it. So I still have a broken nose. But thank God I got into the Naval Academy. And then we had boys from all of the states, and we had boys from the countries that are attached to the United States, and young men. They're not boys anymore, they're young men. But I have never been in association with so many wonderful people in my life. And so I got through my plebe year, everything went fine. And then in my next year, I was elected class vice president, which I was certainly honored and amazed. And then on the following 2 years, I was elected class president. Junior and senior years, or I guess we don't call it junior and senior there, but second class, third class, first class.
That's right.
In my second class year and my first class year. And then the Admiral superintendent, just out of nowhere, called me I was going into my third year, and wanted me to help develop an honor system for the Naval Academy. And I was just honored that he would even think about me. So I told him I'd be glad to do it, and he gave me the full responsibility. And I came up with my plan to do it. We met with every platoon at the Naval Academy, and it was going to be their honor system, not something that was imposed on them. It is the most rigorous, demanding honor system you could possibly imagine. The superintendent was amazed, but the fact is that it came from the midshipmen. And they got that put in place. All that worked well, and I was in charge of that for the junior and senior years as we worked on it. It really put it all together. It was in operation, but it really set the highest standards, and I think had a very positive impact. And I was just fortunate to be a part of that.
We're all grateful for that one, Mr. Perot. And you know, there were a few times, I guess, where the honor system broke down. And what we always reverted back to, I remember during my days as superintendent, reverted back to your thoughts, which the midshipmen have to own the honor concept.
Exactly.
And when they own it, it works.
And boy, do they keep high standards.
Yeah, yeah.
But they're their high standards. It worked fine. And so that was one of the greatest experiences I had in my life, and I'll never forget that. And going out on cruises, too good to be true. One cruise on a submarine, on a destroyer, one cruise on the Missouri, and it doesn't get much better than that.
Now we saw one thing down in your museum, sir, that was fascinating to us, and I didn't realize this, that you had the privilege of showing President Eisenhower around the Naval Academy. How did that come about?
Well, it was only God knows. But I was a senior. I was in my first class year as a senior. He was elected president. I was in charge of the 1st Battalion, and I led the 1st Battalion on the parade. And then several weeks later, President Eisenhower and Mrs. Eisenhower came to chapel at the Naval Academy, and the superintendent came to me and said, I'd like for you to give them a tour of the Naval Academy. I couldn't believe it. Yeah. And I will never forget, they were just like the neighbors next door. They couldn't have been kinder or more gentle. And you know, it was not like he was strutting around saying 5-star general, president of the United States, nothing like that at all about him. And then years went by after that. He lived in Kansas, right up here.
We saw that home. You should tell us that story.
Okay, they lived in Kansas. They moved down to Texas to his dad to build the railroad. Yeah. And the railroad is right there in Denison, Texas, tonight. And the house that his dad built while they were there is right there. But then it was really just getting old and falling apart. And suddenly the people from Denison contacted me and asked me if I would rebuild it. And I was honored to do that. And it's right there now in great shape, and people tour it all the time. But then the interesting thing is that at the library in Denison, for some impulsive reason, I just thought I'd see if there was anything about Eisenhower in the library. There was a tremendous amount of stuff, including letters and things that he had written, and he applied to the Naval Academy and didn't get in, had to go to that other place. Oh, have I had fun with that? I have had fun with that. But that's pretty sensitive at West Point.
Yeah, that's another.
And that's another story. But you know, later on they got even with me. They put me in jail one time, but on a bet for the Army-Navy game. But he was just a great man, and it's just incredible. All the things he did during his career in World War II, and he was a great president. So
I think historians are now understanding he was indeed a great president.
Oh yeah, oh boy,
yeah.
Oh boy.
Now, while you were at the Academy, sir, before we get too far into the life as a Navy ensign and Lieutenant JG, you were introduced on a blind date to your lovely wife.
That's right. A friend of mine was dating a girl that went to Goucher College in Baltimore, and he kept telling me that, you know, he knew this girl, that he thought it would really just be a perfect fit. And his girlfriend was talking to her, and she wasn't interested in meeting somebody from Texas. But to make a long story short, they finally arranged it. And we went down I met him at that cafe, I should be able to say it. But anyhow, and met her at dinner and had a great time with her. We went to the dance at the Naval Academy the next night. And then we went on and kept dating one another. Then I graduated, and my dream was to have a cruise around the world. Well, I was 524, I think, was my card. So I wasn't exactly at the head of the line to get to pick it. But I got all the ships that were going around the world, and one was in a different location than all the others. And believe it or not, it was still there, so I picked the Sigourney and got to join the Navy and see the world as an ensign, and Margot was still in college. And so I was going to be gone for almost 13 months. And I just hoped that she would have found somebody else. And of course, all of her friends have stories they tell about she was dating doctors and medical students over there in Baltimore. What's the famous college? Johns Hopkins, right. And what have you. But to make a long story short, we communicated by mail all that time. And then I came home, and our love was still there. And then the next fall, she had become a school teacher. We got married, and lived in Rhode Island, because by then I had gone to an aircraft carrier, and the Lady, and she taught school there. That's where it was based, is up in Rhode Island. And then we got married, and we were married then. We were married then before she moved up there. And then, unfortunately, my dad died in 1957, and this says a lot. I was on an aircraft carrier, and the captain of the carrier said, "Fro, I'll fly you home." And it was only fairly small, whatever they had to fly me. But he flew me home to the funeral and what have you, and I'll never forget that. And then I came back, but I really felt obligated to come back home and take care of my mother. because she needed support and help. And so when I'd served my 4 years, and Margot had been with me for about over a year and a half then, we came back to Texas, and she became a school teacher in Texas, which when I came back. And fortunately, on the aircraft carrier, one time we had the executive vice president of IBM, who was a war hero in World War II, and at the end of the war was so injured that he was in the hospital for 2 years, so wounded, I should say. And Tom Watson Sr. visited the hospital and said, "Young man, you're outstanding." He says, "What are your plans when you get out of the hospital?" He says, "Sir, I need to find a job." He said, "Would you like to have a job with IBM?" And he says, "Yes, sir, I would, but I don't know what you do." And now when I met him, he was executive vice president of IBM because he was on the aircraft carrier. And here's this kid giving all the orders. And the captain, he said, he was really impressed with me giving all these orders up on the bridge as assistant navigator when we were coming alongside other ships and refueling and landing and launching airplanes. And the captain mentioned to him that I was leaving the Navy because my dad had passed away. He came over and said, "I understand you're leaving the Navy, young man." "Yes, sir." He said, "Would you like to have a job with IBM?" I looked him right in the eye. I said, "Mister, I started to work when I was 6 years old. You're the first person that ever offered me a job. I would love to have a job with your company, but I don't even know what you do." So when I found out what they do, I really got excited. I got a job in Dallas, and that's when I got in the computer business. And it was really a great opportunity because, you know, I had always worked hard all my life, and it was a time when everybody was buying computers, and we had a quota that you had to make, and all you had to do is just keep making calls and what have you. And I made my quota, and my quota got bigger every year. And I made the last one because it was a huge quota in March of the year. I didn't have much to do, but by then I knew that people were buying IBM computers and didn't know how to use them. And I wanted to give them a finished product. If it's a bank, give them software for a bank and so on. So I couldn't get IBM interested in all. And then I was reading a Reader's Digest one day, and it's right over there, and it had a quote from Thoreau, "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation." I said, "That's me." And then I had to give it a try, and so I left the Navy, I came home, got a job with IBM in Dallas, and my mother, I had my first child was born. My mother left Texarkana immediately and came to Dallas, so my whole goal was to be able to take good care of her, and that made it very easy, but I had to have a son to do that. And but as I worked with IBM, and I would work hard all day, I made my quota very early in the year, and they got where he says, "You're making so much money, Perot, we're not going to be able to promote you," you know, and on and on and on and on. And I said, "Well, I don't make it until I earn it, so, you know, I hope you won't worry about it," but they were. And but in the meantime, I realized that people couldn't make their computers work properly. And I said, "We need to have a whole complete software list for banks, one for insurance companies, one for hospitals, bang, 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 bang." And I said, then we can go all the way in. They can get the full utilization of their computer. They weren't interested at all. And so I had to try it, and I left IBM and started, the first company was EDS, and it was very, very successful because the people needed this. And we had great, talented people. Now, again and again, people have been overwhelmed by the talent in my companies. And I said, "Well, the answer's pretty simple. We don't have trained systems engineers. I have to train them after they come in. I'm looking for technologists with leadership skills, and most technologists are geeks or nerds who couldn't lead a group in silent prayer in an emergency." So to make a long story short, I would not ever try to attract anyone out of the military. Now, the wars were still going on, had these huge numbers of people coming out of the military, and the ones that had college degrees, I would just hire and train them as systems engineers. The one that hadn't gone to college fought for less pay than a second lieutenant, and they were determined to go on the GI Bill. I would let them work in my computer centers that ran 3 shifts a day, 7 days a week, But if you wanted to go in the daytime, you could do it at night. So they had the money to do it. Then, interestingly enough, there was a magic wand in there I never thought about. Most systems engineers have never had to make the computer work. These people, before they became systems engineers, kept that peak computer working flawlessly around the clock. And then when they became systems engineers, they had leadership skills from combat, which is the ultimate test. Years later, I tried to get some of our most elite colleges to teach leadership, and they wouldn't. But boy, you can sure get it out of the military, and it's there. And we'd never try to tuck anyone out, but after they left, we would certainly take them in our company. And the only reason let's go back to many years later, when we had our men in Iran that were being held as prisoners. So I had done a lot with special operations, and Colonel Simons had become a good friend, because now the only contact I ever had from him, he would call me night and day. And now this is after I had made money and all that sort of thing on wounded soldiers. And boy, if he had ever wounded soldier, it was just like it was his own son. But to make a long story short, he had retired. I called him, explained the situation, told him I had all these veterans in the company and I thought we could put together a real good rescue team. But I needed somebody to plan it and lead it. He said, I'll do it. He came up, interviewed 300 people, took the dirty dozen, he called it the dirty dozen, and interesting, one person who's really a wonderful man that he wouldn't take, earned the Medal of Honor, and he says, this guy's too focused. He had some little problem. He wouldn't take him, and I don't want to say anything negative about that man because of all he's done. But he put the team together, he put them in training. Then it was time to take them over to Iran and wait. He'd like to get in position and wait. He took them over to Iran. He sneaked them into the country. Nobody knew he was there. Nobody knew the team was there. He roamed the streets of Tehran and saw all of these crazy terrorists roaming the streets and said, if I could organize those people, I'd have an army that didn't cost me anything. He had an Iranian that had worked for us. He was loyal to us. He had him organize the team. Then he had the Iranian go to the morning meetings where the terrorists met. But before that, he had me come over to tell the two men we were about ready to get them out. And when I got there and I realized how complicated everything was, he had sent me to the embassy, and that's when Jimmy Carter was president, and within 30 minutes after I left the embassy, they'd told the Iranians I was there and they were tearing the town up. So I had to kind of lie low for a while. But then he told me, okay, Perot, now I want you to go into the prison. He had everything ready. I want you to go into the prison. And this Iranian got to go to the terrorist team meetings, became a really key member in the terrorist teams. And he said, tell the men we're going to rescue them, we're going to assault the prison, and we want them to come to a certain rendezvous point. And I said, well, Colonel, they're tearing the town up looking for me. He says, Perot, they're not at the prison, they're not, so just go ahead and do it. So he told you I did it. Got there were more cars and everything, and camera crews and everything at the entrance. I thought, gosh, who arranged this? Walked past him, I said, there must be somebody else up here. I got up to the waiting room, and there was Ramsey Clark talking to the general who ran the prison. And Ramsey started leaning forward and squinting and talking, pointing to me. The general jumped over, and I said, well, this is it. He couldn't have been nicer and more enthusiastic. Arranged for me to meet with my two men, Paul and Bill, and I told them what the rendezvous point was, where to come, and when we were going to do it. And I walked out, and all these camera crews and everybody were looking for Ramsey Clark. So they ignored me, and we got it done. And then the rescue went perfectly. Simons told me after we had gotten them out, for me, Reza, the man that was Iranian, Simons told him to go try to bribe the police to leave the army open. He left the army open, and then his team went in and got all kinds of weapons. And he was throwing them around the room in the morning, and then the whole terrorist team charged the prison. And Paul and Bill knew that was going to happen and where to go. And long story short, everything happened just perfectly. And the he took the prisoners out, 540, and his rescue team out, 540 miles overland, but he sent me to Turkey to get the plane ready so that the minute they got there. So I had to get on the plane even though they were tearing the town up looking for me. I got to the airport, the lady had my picture right on her. She was reading a book. And she stamped me, and I walked past and sat there for almost an hour and got on the plane. Now, a long time later, after Ken Follett had written a book on Wings of Eagles, he heard that story. He says, Perot, he must have been reading one of my earlier books. But she must have been reading one. Well, to make a long story short, they all got there. They got on the plane, and he gave me some interesting documents that I have here still about the thing that's 30 miles from the border. They stopped everybody, started beating Salmons with a rifle, and instead of fighting back to him, he had weapons and everything, he just handed him a note. Says, these people are friends of the revolution, show them every courtesy, and if necessary, escort them safely to the border. They escorted them safely to the border. Chairman Terrorized Resolutionary Committee, Big Seal. He showed this to me on the plane, and I went to Reza, who was on the plane with us with no papers or anything. And I said, Reza, what are these words in Farsi? He said, these Reza Religious School founded 1344. And I said, Colonel, weren't you worried about that seal? No, Perot, do you ever read seals? So, okay, but we all got home safely. Then we had to get Reza into the country. We got that taken care of, and all of the credit should go to Bull Salmons. He was having heart attacks during this whole thing. Wow. Had a severe heart attack after we got back to Dallas. We had all the top doctors, heart doctors, the surgeons working on him, and he died during the surgery. Now, to show you his hold on other people, they've just known him a few days. These doctors were crying openly, and that's not typical. No. And so we lost Colonel Salmons, and but anyhow, everybody made it home, and everybody went on to a normal life because of Colonel Salmons.
That's a wonderful
That's
story.
more than you wanted to hear.
That's a wonderful story.
Great American. Yeah.
You know, as a leader, many of your stories talk about serving others more than you serve yourself.
Right.
You've been doing that since you were at the Academy, and can you articulate how the Academy helped influence that philosophy? You started the EDS.
They taught me that.
You've clearly served the world more than you've served yourself.
I have begged our most elite colleges to teach leadership, and they say you can't teach it. Well, they can't. I said, well, I give them the example. I said, no, you can. But to make a long story short, that to come from Harvard, Yale, MIT, or whatever, I actually offered to fund it one time. They wouldn't touch it. But leadership is one of the principal problems our country has now. And so we sure need, the Naval Academy is and the other military academies also are, I think, a tremendous source of leaders for our country.
Well, it's remarkable, your story. I can remember inviting you to come and talk. You've talked to the midshipmen, of course, many times, but when I was privileged to be the superintendent in the 98 to 2002, I remember you came and you gave a great Forrestal lecture. And after it, a couple of midshipmen came up. You had already walked over and they were talking to you, and this other group came up to me, Mr. Perot, and said, Mr. Perot just talked for 45 minutes and he never mentioned himself. You were talking about the great leaders that you knew, the Jim Stockdales and the Bill Lawrences, the Robbie Reisners. I'll never forget that talk. And, that was a great lesson, I think, for the entire brigade of midshipmen that, we're there to serve others. You have some signs down there that say, don't worry about your own happiness. Focus on others, and you'll have that happiness.
That's right.
I suspect we started this interview talking about your father. I think maybe sometimes we forget that our parents are a really big impact on us, and we're looking for heroes that are on newspapers and magazine covers, when in fact it's the men and women who raised us.
That's right.
Start that along.
100% of the credit goes to both of them. They got me in shape to go to the Naval Academy, and then they got me in shape.
Now, your son is a wonderful young man, and you write in your book about living in the shadow of your son today. He told us a story about his helicopter trip around the world.
Right.
he thought you were more worried than your wife about that trip around the world. Can you tell us about that trip around the world and how that all came about?
Well, I was worried to death. Single engine helicopter going across, just take the Pacific Ocean and on refueling and on and on. And you know, it's not as though you have a backup engine or anything. If something goes wrong, you're going down. But to make a long story short, he planned it, he got it done. He replaced Lindbergh as the youngest man ever recognized by the Air and Space Museum, and went on to become an Air Force fighter pilot. And now his son is about to, and Robbie Reisner pinned his wings on my son. Have I told you that?
No, we haven't.
Oh, no, I want you to know. Can you imagine what that meant to both of us? He was there at the ceremony and pinned his wings on Ross. Now, Robbie is not able to come to Hill is Ross' third Hill's ceremony, and but Ross wants to pin his wings, Robbie's wings. Ross, his dad, would pin Robbie's wings on Hill. And I thought, well, that says a lot about Ross too, because boy, nothing in the world means more to him than Robbie's wings. Right. But Robbie's in great spirit about the whole thing, even though he's not able to travel. And Ross and I have been very careful to get his approval on everything.
Well, when you put that trip together, your son told us about how the risk was managed, and at one point he said there was a logistical complication flying over the Soviet Union at that time.
Oh yeah.
So he tells the story of you calling to try to get the landing rights in the Soviet Union, and then calling, I think, Mr. Hammer about getting a ship off the coast to figure out how to refuel. Can you tell our alumni a little bit about that? I think it's a little bit of a view into how you and your son have evolved over time as leaders.
Oh yeah,
and risk
well, I
takers.
know that we couldn't get anything done with Russia, so he flew around a little different way, where he could land and land and land and land, and we had to, see, I had a plane following him. You knew that?
He told me that.
Yeah. Now this plane had two big engines, but it could only use one to stay slow enough to be around the helicopter. And fortunately, the plane stayed together. Everything worked out, and he got home safe and sound, and we were very lucky that all worked out so well.
Right. He told me the Navy flew over top of him every now and then. They flew an air patrol just to make sure all was well. Was that your influence over that?
No, I didn't know. If I ever knew that, I've forgotten it. I'm serious, but I'm pleased if they did. He would know. He would know for exactly.
Would know.
He was there. I wasn't.
Well, the leadership he's now shown as part of the Perot Museum is something we're going to see later today. But let me just say on behalf of our alumni, thank you for continuing to plug into this issue of STEM, science and technology, in our youth today. What's your view on where we are today as a country in this world of science
Here's
and
our
technology?
problem. 80% of our people getting PhDs in science and engineering come from China and India, in our most elite and finest engineering schools, Caltech, MIT, and what have you. All right? 18% come from all over the world, not the U.S. Only 2% come to the U.S. Now, we've got to train scientists and engineers, because the people that have those backgrounds, that training, can come up with a new, unorthodox idea. But once you start mass producing it, thousands of people, maybe that never got to finish high school or what have you, in the factories, now they need hand-eye coordination, which we don't have, and the Chinese have it off the wall, because they can draw 7,000 to 8,000 symbols. We draw 26 characters and numbers. But to make a long story short, you need to have these scientists and engineers creating new creative things that later turn into factories all over the country, jobs all over the country, and so on and so forth. Right. So when they approached me on this, and they seemed to have a good idea, I couldn't resist letting them do it. So I funded it. And the fact that it's just been open a few months now, and over 500,000 people have been there already, and a huge number of that 500,000 people are school children coming on school buses and spending hours there, and they get so excited and turned on, because they've never seen all of this. And it's all right there. Of course, I have to give the full credit to the people who put it in place all that. It's one thing to dream about it, it's another thing to get it done. But they have really done a great job, so I couldn't be more proud of all of them. And one of my daughters was our key person in the family, working with them on a daily basis.
Wonderful.
Ross was involved, but not nearly at the level she was, because Ross has a lot of work to do in his businesses.
Yeah. well, it's a great asset to not only Dallas, but to the country.
Well, thank you, and I'm just glad it's turned out so well.
Well, we want to thank you for your time, Mr. Perot, but most importantly, we want to thank you for all you've done for the country, for our military, our veterans, and for the Naval Academy. We're here because you've been so generous to us over many, many years, but you've also been a role model to what leadership is all about.